Although the focus of a BIA is primarily on business continuity, the BIA can also be used in a risk assessment. In other words, if you're trying to determine what systems to evaluate with a risk assessment, you can consider the BIA. At the very least, the BIA identifies and prioritizes the critical systems. Similarly, if you've already completed a risk assessment, you can use that data to help with the BIA, the business impact analysis. One of the first steps in an risk analysis, basically is to identify the assets. This helps you identify the assets that are important to the critical to the organization. So, as we see on the screen here, the 7 steps of contingency planning, and I know they're listed 1 through 7, excuse me, but they can also some of these can be interchangeable and work simultaneously as you're working through the process. But as we mentioned earlier, the organization NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has published special publication which is SP 800-34 Revision 1. It is basically it's titled Contingency Planning for Federal Information Systems. And this is where a lot of organizations are going to, whether they're Department of Defense or federal or private industry. These are some good standards to go by. Excuse me. So contingency planning helps an organization identify measures to recover services after an emergency or disaster. So the special publication 834 Revision 1 includes information on business impact analysis. Even though SP 800-34 Revision 1 is focused on federal information systems, it can be used for any private organization, just as I mentioned. So there are 7 critical steps of contingency planning. The 7 steps are: 1. Develop the contingency planning policy statement. So you must know where you're going. You develop the policy statement. Basically it's kind of like a mission statement. You can at least start out with that, saying what's our purpose, what's our goals, and this is going to be our policy. Number 2, conduct the business impact analysis. Number 3, identify preventive controls. So you can see steps 2 and 3. If you've already done a risk assessment, you can help identify these things. But as you conduct a business impact analysis, then you can look at these critical functions, and from that you can develop a risk assessment. So number 3, identify preventive controls. Number 4, create contingency strategies. So basically, what's your strategy going to be if this happens, if this happens, if that happens? What are we going to do? Then if server A goes down, then server B is its redundancy failover, and then you may have your power grid within your organization that you see that in order to have this level of success, you're going to need redundancy failovers, you're going to need additional servers, which will also probably include more or basically additional power. So those are some of the things that you want to focus and set your strategies on, of how are you going to defend against a contingency. So number 5, develop an information systems contingency plan. And number 6, ensure plan testing, training, and exercises. So in other words, once you develop all of this, you need to test it, need to train people with it, and you need to run live exercises with it. And number 7, ensure the plan maintenance. In other words, you want to go back and look at your plan, and as you develop a risk assessment throughout the process of the organization and identifying vulnerabilities and threats, then your contingency plan may actually change some. So you want to keep this, basically when it says ensure plan maintenance, you want to be able to go back and you don't want it to be locked into one thing. So as the organization grows, so will your IT needs, and so will the vulnerabilities and threats, and so will the business impact analysis. What are the critical functions? So as you add those things, then so is your contingency plan will be added to as well. So basically the business impact analysis is part of the overall contingency planning. As the second step, excuse me, it drives much of the contingency planning. You only need to plan contingencies for systems identified as critical in the business impact analysis. You're not doing a full certification and accreditation on your systems. You are only identifying critical functions. You're like, well, shouldn't we always focus on that? Yes, you should focus on the critical. But what makes those critical functions operate? There are some backdoor things that have to happen. There are behind-the-scene things that have to happen. Whether it's a small server, big server, whatever that's operating and feeding the data. So those things are also important. So we need to maintain the word critical, as we're identifying critical functions and critical processes that will make your business successful or eventually destroy your business because you have no contingency set up for it. So basically you can conduct interviews with key personnel. You can improve the results with a little forethought. Plan the interviews. Make sure the people you're interviewing have time to answer your questions. Make sure that you're ready with the right questions. Remember, your questions should focus on critical business functions and the maximum allowed outage of supporting resources. So another method is to use questionnaires, forms, or surveys. And then you can also host meetings or conference calls and that kind of thing to help identify critical functions. And they're basically the varying data collection methods, and you're not limited to one way to collect the data. And you can use several methods as long as you're getting the data. And as long as you're getting people to cooperate. You don't want to force this on people, but you want to make it as pleasant as possible while you're going through the process, and having the help of the organization and the people within it makes your job a whole lot easier. So you don't need to be rude and crude. You want to go in and say, okay, we're doing this study, we're doing this impact analysis, and from your point of view, what if, or what would happen if, you can ask those type of questions to personnel, the employees throughout the organization, especially the worker bees. They know what has to happen in order to get their jobs done. So what are the dimensions of a business impact analysis? One is to identify the business impact of IT disruptions. So as with any project, it's important to define the scope of a business impact analysis early in the process. Basically, the scope defines the boundaries of the plan, and we've mentioned scope, budgets, and things like that in the previous lectures and previous lessons. So defining the scope helps ensure that the business impact analysis is focused. We've mentioned this before. That's the reason of the scope. You want to stay within this scope to stay focused on the task at hand. And basically that ensures that you analyze the correct functions, not all, but the ones that are critical and correct. So the scope is affected, by the size of the organization. For small organizations, the scope of the BIA could include the entire organization. For larger organizations, it may only pertain to certain areas. For example, one BIA may include only the online sales division of a large business. Other BIAs would examine other areas of the business. You should also consider the budget when identifying the scope. If the organization is large enough, you can hire a security consultant to assist with the BIA. However, if the budget is limited, this may not be possible. So as mentioned before, we're going to, basically the second step of a BIA is mission critical IT systems and components. Does not analyze all the IT functions. Stakeholders identify mission critical systems. Compliance issues often drive the BIA, which if you're a medical organization, HIPAA would basically define your role as far as the policies and compliance go. PCI DSS is another compliance that must be adhered to, and so that would help drive your business impact analysis. Inputs into the business continuity plan and risk assessment. So basically the business impact analysis can get you on the road to a very successful risk management plan that would help you identify and stay within the scope. It can help, as I mentioned here, with the business continuity plan and risk assessment. So we want to identify, basically define the scope of a BIA. Basically define a BIA scope early in the process, as we mentioned. And we mentioned the boundaries, the small and large organizations. I'll try to keep up with my slides as I talk, but sometimes I get carried away. And oh wow, look at that. Look at the display on the screen. It's not exactly the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure, but you can pretty much identify which one of these go into which domain. And so, I can't stress enough, no matter what class you're taking, especially if you're doing cybersecurity, information technology, and you plan on going to information assurance, you need to know the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. I cannot tell you enough, that this is, basically, it's a good foundation for you to learn and for you to start. And so when you see things like this, like, oh, okay, well, so-and-so, this belongs to the WAN domain, the LAN WAN domain, the user domain, or the remote access domain. You see the picture that I'm trying to draw that you can identify as like, oh, okay, well that goes to this domain. And so we know that the critical vulnerabilities that would cause this system to go down or cause the organization to fail. And so it would help you identify these things. And so that way when you see these, you'll say, oh, okay, got it. Make your boss proud, right? They probably wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about, but still, it makes you look like you know what you're talking about. So the objectives of the BIA is to identify the critical business function, identify critical resources, identify maximum acceptable outage, and the impact, and the direct and indirect cost. Identify recovery requirements. Okay, so balancing the cost, basically the cost to recover, cost of disruption. You may want to consider the direct cost, indirect cost. You're saying, well, okay, what's a direct cost and what's an indirect cost? So let's take, for instance, as it relates to cost, the business impact analysis as it relates to the cost. As an example, consider a website that sells products online. If it fails for 60 seconds, if it fails for 60 seconds, the cost of the disruption is very low. But if the outage lasts for days, not 4 days, but 4 days, the cost of disruption is very high. You can implement controls that allow the website to recover immediately from a 60-second outage, but the cost is very high. In contrast, if you spend very little money on recovery controls, it results in a longer outage time. So you need to look at how those balance out, okay? So either way, you're going to spend some money, or either that or you're going to lose money. You basically want to spend money to save money to keep from losing money, or you don't spend the money to rectify the problem if a disruption happens, and then you're going to lose money on the back end. So basically this helps you to identify the optimum, basically the most, okay, so what's your highest cost point? Basically you spend the minimum amount on recovery controls while still minimizing the cost of disruption. So the optimum cost point is what you want to look at. Basically that's what you're going to spend the minimum amount of money to recover controls while still minimizing the cost of disruption. So the steps involved in implementing a business impact analysis, basically we're going to identify the environment. You identify your stakeholders. A lot of times it's senior management or basically outside folks that help fund the business that you're unaware of. Identify the critical business functions, identify critical resources, identify the maximum downtime, identify recovery priorities, and develop the business impact analysis report. So in identifying mission critical business process or functions and processes, so they're basically any functions considered to be vital. And anytime you use the word vital, like if you are checking the pulse on somebody or somebody's sick, well, what are their vital signs? In other words, are they good? Then that's all right. But if the vital signs are bad, then that can bode well, not so well for the patient. Same way if you're talking about electronics, information technology. What is your vitals of the organization? What are your vitals? What makes your organization tick? What would cause your organization to fail? So consider what to be any functions considered to be vital. So, and then mission critical functions are derived from from critical success factors, and successful CSFs, I'll get that out in a minute, result in performing performing the CBFs. And then of course your subject matter experts or your experts have key information regarding mission critical functions. So our business impact best practices. You want to start with clear objectives. Maintain focus on objectives. Use a top-down approach. As we mentioned before, what's most critical to least critical. Vary the data collection methods, whether it's through surveys or whether it's through personal interviews or whatever method works so that you can get the information. You don't have to interrogate the employees of the company to get the information. So as we mentioned before, you need to make this as pleasant as possible for everybody. Just because you're having to do it in a bad mood doesn't mean everybody else has to be. And I've worked with some of those folks, and I've had to pull them off to the side, and it's like, okay, it's easier to attract more flies with honey than vinegar. And they looked at me real funny like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, you're not happy about doing the business impact analysis and identifying the critical functions, and you're coming to the subject matter experts, but you're coming at them with an attitude which makes them less willing to help you in your job. So basically you need these people in order to get your job done. So if you approach them in a more cautious way and a more polite way, they're more apt to sit down with you and discuss the critical functions in their area, or they're more apt to fill out the survey that you sent out. So it does matter on the data collection methods. The messenger matters a lot. So it's like I tell my kids, and I've coached youth league baseball and football, and we've had successful seasons and not so successful seasons. But at the end of the day, I tell them you can get a long ways, or go a long way, and get very far in life just by using yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, please and thank you. Those will get you a long way. So I can't stress enough that the messenger matters a lot on how you collect the methods of the data collection methods. So you basically want to plan the interviews and meetings in advance, avoid a quick solution, use normal project management methods, consider the use of technology resources. We mentioned before web surveys, email surveys, anything that would help you get the answers that you need. So that basically concludes chapter 12, and we'll move into chapter 13 here in just a moment. Okay, so chapter 13, mitigating risk with a business continuity plan, a BCP. What is a business continuity plan? Well, you know, BCPs are an important element of the risk assessment, or excuse me, of risk management. They help an organization plan for a major disruption or disaster and ensure the critical business functions continue to operate. The business impact analysis sets the stage for the BCP. So the previous chapter we talked about the business impact analysis. You know, basically you're setting the stage for the BCP. You have to have the business impact analysis for that to happen. So the business impact analysis basically sets the stage for the BCP by identifying the critical business functions. The BCP coordinator then develops the BCP to support the critical business functions. So the business continuity plan coordinator has assistance from one or more BCP teams and team leads. So basically activities happen in different phases if the disruption occurs. The first phase is the notification activation phase. The second phase is the recovery phase, where critical business functions are recovered and returned to full operation. The final phase is the reconstruction, or excuse me, the reconstitution phase, where the organization returns to normal operations. In order for a BCP to succeed, personnel need to be trained, and the BCP needs to be tested and exercised. Additionally, the BCP needs to be reviewed regularly and kept up to date. So don't just complete one and say you're done. So it's not one and done. You know, you create one and oh boy, here comes more fun as your organization grows. And that's a good thing. As your organization grows, that means your organization is you know, gaining financial status, and so that helps in the long run. And so we've already talked about this on the screen. I got ahead of myself again. And so, excuse me. So basically, what are the elements of a BCP? Since BCPs are large, comprehensive documents, they include many elements and often cover many contingencies. There isn't a single format that will cover all requirements for all organizations. However, some guides suggests the inclusion of certain elements. For example, the following sections, basically include a BCP: purpose and scope, assumptions and planning principles, system description and architecture, responsibilities, notification, activation phase, recovery phase, reconstitution phase, plan, training, testing and exercise, plan, maintenance. Excuse me. So you're saying, well, the business continuity plan, that sort of sounds like a disaster recovery plan. Well, they're very similar in nature, but basically, business continuity and disaster recovery are not synonymous, whether we like it or not. They're two separate but related processes. Some people confuse them and use the terms interchangeably. However, they're not the same. Business continuity covers all functions of a business to ensure the entire business can continue to operate in the event of a disruption. It includes a business impact analysis. It also includes disaster recovery plans and attachments of the as attachments of the BCP. So disaster recovery is largely a function of IT. It includes the elements necessary to recover from a disaster. It includes such as backup servers, recoveries, and restores. Disaster recovery can also be broader and include elements such as alternate sites. However, the DRP, the disaster recovery plan, DRP, is part of the larger business continuity plan. For example, let's say a bank that operates on a coast threatened by hurricanes. Customers use the bank's website to do online banking. So if a hurricane hits, the bank wants to ensure that its website will continue to be available. The business continuity plan could include a disaster recovery that includes the steps needed to recover the bank website at an alternate location. So basically, the BCP may address other non-technical elements of the hurricane. For example, when should the bank close? When should the vault be locked? Should guards remain inside? Are there any other security precautions to take? So after the disaster passes, both the business continuity plan and disaster recovery plans would have different goals, but they would work together. Again, the business continuity plan is focused on getting the overall business functions back to normal. The disaster recovery plan is focused on restoring and recovering IT functions. So as we can see, let me just restate that the business continuity plan is the overall, basically the disaster recovery plan belongs in the business continuity plan, either as an attachment or additional steps or whatever. But I can see where people can interchange those and get them confused. Wow, look at that diagram there. Looks like we the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure that can each one of these can be put in place in one of those. So you want to develop, basically you want to develop a system description and architecture and basically a network diagram of how the business functions flow. Basically the headquarters to remote office, there's the wide area network in between, and both ends have a database servers that probably need to be synced. So that way if one outage happens at headquarters, then remote office can take over. Basically, you want to give the system description and architect, show the system interaction, and basically where it has to take place. You have all the stores here with the servers that link up through the wide area network that goes to the database server and basically back to the headquarters. So now we come to the business continuity plan roles and responsibilities. There's not one person that I know that really gets a kick off of saying, hey, we can I get to do the business continuity planning, yay. So a lot of times when they're looking for somebody, it's either somebody that's with high subject matter expert that knows the entire organization and knows where to start and where to look. But basically it starts out with the program manager, the BCP program manager. Usually, they're the ones that manage multiple business continuity projects within a large organization. So for an example, a large organization could have multiple locations and BCPs for each location. A BCP coordinator manages a single BCP and reports to the BCP project program manager. And so so the business continuity plan program manager is responsible for ensuring that each of the business continuity plans is on track. Depending on the hierarchy of the organization, the BCP program manager may not have any authority over the individual BCP coordinators. This requires exceptional communication skills on the part of the program manager. Basically, and other organizations may have a specific department of program managers. Personnel in this department have specialized project management skills. Lead program managers oversee several PMs. In this situation, the BCP PMs have direct authority over the BCP coordinators. So the BCP coordinator is in charge of a specific business continuity plan. This individual can have two roles depending on the stage of the BCP. Before the BCP is completed and activated, this person is responsible for developing and completing it. So when the BCP is completed and activated, the BCP coordinator is responsible for declaring the emergency and activating the BCP. So basically, when an emergency is declared, the business continuity plan coordinator contacts appropriate teams or leads or team leads. For example, if an emergency management team is used, the BCP coordinator will contact the emergency management team lead. And so who are the BCP teams, the business continuity plan teams? The emergency management teams, the EMT, damage assessment team, the DAT, and the technical recovery team, TRT. These teams let me back up a step here. So let's look at each one of these team members. The emergency management team, the EMT. This plan is composed of senior managers. They have overall authority for the recovery of the system, but also work closely with the BCP coordinator. At this point, there is a potential for conflict. Who's in charge? The BCP coordinator or the EMT lead? To avoid this conflict, the BCP identifies who makes the ultimate decisions. For example, the business continuity plan coordinator may be in charge until the EMT lead shows up, and then authority passes to the EMT lead. Either way, the EMT works closely with the damage assessment team to identify damage. The EMT also works closely with the business continuity planning coordinator to determine the response time. The damage assessment team, the DAT, D-A-T, this team assesses the damage and declares the severity of the incident. The members primarily collect and report data but don't take any action. The exception is if they identify personnel that need assistance. Preserving the health and safety of personnel is always a top priority. even though their job is not to take action, if you see, you know, somebody in need that after a disaster happens, that's first priority. And so that's about the only time that you would overstep those lines. On the damage assessment team, the team can include IT personnel, facility personnel, and any other personnel overseeing resources. And, you know, basically the team members report to the emergency management team. So then we come to the technical recovery team. This team is responsible for recovering the critical IT resources. Remember, during the disruption, you will recover and restore only the IT resources identified in the business impact analysis. The members of the tactical recovery team will need skills directly related to the source they are recovering. For example, if the team members need to restore a database server, they need knowledge of how to do so. So basically, you know, if the plan calls for a technical recovery team, and you know the different areas that would be impacted, whether it's a database administrator, domain administrator, web developer, you see where I'm getting at. You want to have subject matter experts from each department on your side here. Okay, so we've already gone through some of these, the phases within a business continuity plan: notification, activation phase, recovery phase, reconstitution phase. So defining the data that needs to be protected. Identify all critical components for the system. Identify all equipment, servers, switches, routers, etc. Include databases hosted on the system. Include files, documents, or spreadsheets, and include necessary supplies. So what is the BCP, Business Continuity Plan best practices? Well, one, complete the business impact analysis early. Exercise caution when returning functionality from alternate locations. Restore least critical functions first. Review and update the business continuity plan. Test all individual pieces of the plan. Conduct test exercises of the plan. So as you can see, as we're getting close to the end of the lecture, chapter 13, and we've already done chapter 12 and chapter 13 in lesson 6, we're basically talking about two key functions excuse me, that are key to the critical business functions, the CBFs. The business impact analysis, you know the purpose of that. And what's the critical success factors of a BIA, steps involved in implementing it, and you know the BIA best practices. Comparing a BCP and a DRP, we went over that just a few minutes ago. The major elements of a business continuity plan, phases of a business continuity plan, and steps for implementing a business continuity plan. So basically, let me touch on a couple of things before we close out. As we mentioned in the business continuity plan, you know, there's basically an order of succession and delegation of authority. Let me go back and touch on this. You know, basically in some disasters, the key personnel may not be available. So for example, if the chief executive officer, the CEO, may want to be informed by the BCP coordinator prior to activating the BCP. However, if the CEO is on vacation and can't be reached, who should the BCP coordinator notify instead? The BCP, the business continuity plan, would include an order of succession. Similar to the Constitution of the United States, there's an order of succession. If the president leaves office early, then the vice president would take place, and then if the vice president also something happens to him, then the Speaker of the House becomes president. So there's 1, 2, and 3 there in line. So basically, you would organizations could designate the order of succession, something similar to like the CEO is the overhead. So if they're not available, then there's the Chief Information Officer, the CIO. And then under that, you have the vice presidents, the VPs, in the following order: service, delivery, sales, and marketing. Department directors in the following order: service, delivery, sales, marketing. If the CEO or the CIO were on site, he or she would be contacted first. So basically, if the CEO or CIO isn't there, the VP of service delivery is contacted. Notice that if both the VPs of service delivery and sales are there, the order of succession specifies that the VP of service delivery is first. So you see how it goes down the hill there. Your notification activation phase, we've talked about that. So one of the things that you want to have is what some people would call the personnel location control form, or a personnel log. Emergency log is what some people call it. Basically, many organizations use a notification roster. This form identifies the name and contact information of appropriate personnel. It can be used in many different ways. The primary purpose is to contact personnel when necessary. For example, consider an organization that is activating a business continuity plan due to an incoming hurricane. Employees can use this form to notify all appropriate personnel. So the same form can be used by the business continuity plan coordinators to locate and talk to any of the team leads. In the same manner, the team leads can use it to contact personnel on their teams. The format can be simple as that shown in your book on table 13-2. That would be a good example to look at. So one of the things that I want to mention before we close up here or stop the lecture is the plan training, testing, and exercises. Although creating the business continuity plan is a huge step, it's not enough. You need to take steps to train the personnel about the plan. You also need to take time to test and exercise your plan. I mean, the overall goals of each of the, say for instance training, you want to teach people details about the business continuity plan. Testing, verify that the business continuity plan will work as planned. Exercises, you want to demonstrate how the business continuity plan will work. And so in training people, the primary people to train for the business continuity plan are the members of the team. They need to know this, the order of succession. Basically you want to have training sessions for all the teams, the EMT training, the DAT training, the TRT training. Those teams need to know their roles in the business continuity plan. You at least want to do this annually. I know some people, organizations do it biannually, but you also, in the DoD and some of those, it used to be quarterly. So basically every 3 months you would have this happening. So the plan maintenance, excuse me, um, basically the BCP coordinator is responsible for the BCP plan. This also includes reviews and updates to the BCP. There are several specific reasons to update the BCP. If there's changes in the IT infrastructure, regular updating such as annually after testing or exercises. You may notice something that was not right in the business continuity plan. You also want to, if you do make changes, you want to have a log sheet, basically a plan revisions tracking document that shows, okay, this person accessed the document here, we made corrections and edits here, and this is why we did it on this date. And you want to notate that on the log sheet. You should basically review the business continuity plan when any substantial changes occur within the IT infrastructure, and it's especially true if any of the critical systems have changed. As we mentioned, annually you want to make your updates and content refreshments on your business continuity plan. That's at a minimum is at least 1 year annually it needs to be done. And so if you can do it without disrupting business functions, do it quarterly, do it biannually, do it more often. That will also help you keep it up to date. So basically, now that we've covered the details on the business continuity plans, as we know, the primary purpose of a BCP is to ensure that an organization can continue to operate after a disruption, disaster. The BCP includes details on the critical business functions, including what needs to be done to keep them operating. So many different individuals and teams share responsibility. The BCP program manager oversees all BCPs, and the BCP coordinator manages one or more BCPs. Multiple teams within the organization, individual team leads will represent each one of these teams. As we know, the BCP has 3 primary phases: the notification activation phase. The BCP coordinator initiates the activity. In the recovery phase, critical systems are recovered and restored, and in the reconstitution phase, normal operations are restored when the disaster has passed. Make sure the BCP team members and leads are trained on the BCP. Additionally, use testing and exercise to ensure the completeness of the BCP. I can't stress this enough, that you want to test, train, exercise. These things have to happen in order for a business continuity plan to be successful. So basically the BCP coordinator is responsible for regularly updating the BCP. This includes regular updates and additional ones when warranted. So I want to thank you for listening to another boring lecture. I hope you've learned some things, as I have. Reading through the chapters, there were a couple things that I noticed that I had forgotten, and so that's one thing about becoming a professor and doing teaching. Sometimes you lose your edge and the technical edge and some of the things that you used to work in full-time. As an information assurance manager, I was very familiar with the DoD best practices for a business continuity plan and also a business impact analysis. But we had teams of subject matter experts that did their parts and worked together as a team, and we were able to come together and have a very nice organization to pass all the certification accreditation processes, which included that you had to have a business impact analysis, disaster recovery plan within the business continuity plan. Remember, those two are not the same. The DRP goes inside the BCP.